Welcome back to American Popular Music. We're continuing the British invasion today. Uh, yeah, British invasion. Part 2. Continuing on. All right, click, go. Okay. Rolling Stones. All right, the big three of the British invasion are the Beatles, the Stones, and the Who. All right, we covered the whole time on the Beatles last time because they're so important. Stones are super important too. They just don't get quite as much of attention. So who are the Stones? Mick Jagger, lead vocals. Keith Richards, lead guitar. Brian Jones, guitar. Bill Wyman on bass, and Charlie Watts on drums. There has been various replacements, right? Brian Jones died in 1969, for example. But this is like the core lineup that we're going to talk about. I'm not going to get through every rhythm guitarist that worked with the Stones, but that's the main group, the original group that achieved popular success. Okay, so they cultivated sort of like a bad boy image. They tried to like kind of, their managers and stuff saw an opening to kind of counterbalance the good boy image of the Beatles, right? They're a little bit too clean cut, a little bit too straight laced for some people's taste. So the Rolling Stones saw that opportunity and tried to cultivate a bad boy image. They were pretty aggressive on stage. They had some violent, misogynistic lyrics. They had real life scandals off stage, abused alcohol, took a lot of drugs. At least, I don't know about all of them, but Brian Jones, Keith Richards, and Mick Jagger all were arrested for drugs in the late 60s for drug possession. So yeah, and part of it was just their natural personality, but it was also sort of, they tried to cultivate that and kind of lean into it because it would help making them popular, being bad boys. Bad boys. Early years, Mick Jagger. Okay, so this is how they started. So Mick Jagger and Keith Richards grew up together in West London suburb. They went to school together. They ran into each other on a commuter train. Later on, they had jammed together like once or twice before, but then they happened to run into each other on a train later on, and then that's why they started to work together more seriously. Brian Jones then met them through the blues bar scene, just playing club dates, hanging out, jamming. They had their first gig at the Marquee Club in '62, and the name of the band comes from a Muddy Waters tune, right? So they're really, really, really into American blues, like classic Delta blues, Muddy Waters, and Son House, and that sort of stuff. So this is evidence of that. It was named after one of Muddy Waters' songs, the Rolling Stones. They were signed by Decca in 1963, actually at the advice of George Harrison. The Stones and the Beatles knew each other by this point, and George Harrison, the guitarist from the lead guitar player from the Beatles, actually recommended them. So they were on good terms, I guess. At least they weren't competitive at that point, anyway. Their first records consisted almost entirely of covers of American rock and blues songs. That's right. So they were writing a little bit, but not a ton, and their writing wasn't super mature yet. But they're just really, really into rock and roll and blues from America. For 3 years, they toured pretty much nonstop, trying to build a base of fans, trying to cut their teeth and get better at playing shows and rock and roll. They're contrary to the Beatles crowds. Their fans grew sometimes violent, fist fights and stuff, breaking out, brawls at their shows. Their first U.S. tour wasn't terribly successful, but they did meet some of their idols, which was really cool. Super important moment for them personally. They met Muddy Waters, Willie Dixon, and Chuck Berry. In Chicago, they recorded at the legendary Chess Studios. That's where that's where those people had recorded in the 50s, right? And they got to record at this studio that they idolized to, Chess Records in Chicago. And they got their first number one hit from that session, which was a cover of Bobby Womack's tune. And I think that was a hit just in the UK. I don't think it was big. It was not a number one hit in the States. Their first United States number one hit was "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" in 1965. You probably know that tune, but if not, let's check it out. Okay, yeah, like you've probably heard that. If not, check out the rest of the song. So that's often it gets ranked in like the top 10 rock songs of all time. Um, I don't know. It's yeah, it's a classic. It's a classic. It's got that riff is really famous. That guitar riff. Supposedly, the story is that Keith Richards came up with that in the middle of the night while they were on tour in Florida, and he recorded it on his tape player, and then Mick Jagger wrote the lyrics the next day, and then they recorded it like 4 days later. Um, it's one of the few times where Mick Jagger actually uses distortion on his guitar. It's funny, for their bad boy image, they usually don't use like very much distortion. But you can hear the aggressiveness of Mick Jagger's vocals. He's more or less shouting, which is a pretty stark contrast to like the Beatles when they're like very smooth, nice singing, often in tight harmony. Right? It's kind of definitely a contrast there. Get Off My Cloud. Do we have a recording of that? No, I'm skipping that one. Okay. Aftermath comes out in the next year, 1966. It's their first record of all entirely original compositions, no covers on this album for the first time. And this is sort of in response to the Beatles, right? They're kind of like being influenced by the Beatles albums like Rubber Soul. And it includes more blues and country and psychedelia. It's not just like straight bass, drums, guitar, vocals, blues-based rock and roll. The Stones always had a lot of blues influence, but now they're getting a little bit out of their comfort zone, like this like psychedelia kind of sound, and getting a little more trippy and going a little more experimental would be a good word for it. Painted Black is their maybe most famous song from this record. It has this raga-esque melody. A raga is an Indian class, like subcontinent Indian musical scale. And so it's influenced by sitar, and probably via the Beatles, because they've brought the sitar into their albums by this point. And so they kind of are listening to a little bit of Indian music, and you can kind of hear that influence in this melody. You get the idea. So it's very hypnotic, and we got that very, very, especially the guitar part, very raga-esque. The late 60s, this is their peak creative period is from like 1968 to 1973, the 5 years where they put out their best material. But in the middle of this, they hit a lot of tragedies, excuse me. But it didn't seem to slow them down too much. So first, I think it was in July, Brian Jones was in the early Stones. He was very, very important and was contributing a lot to the songwriting, or at least the arranging of the tunes. And he was one of the founding members of the band. But he starts to feel like he's getting demoted to like a second tier part of the band, because Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are like kind of vying for control of the band. They're doing most of the writing, and they're getting most of the public attention and stuff. So Brian Jones is feeling a little bit miffed, and they're all into heavy drug use, but maybe him the most. He was maybe the most like, they were all bad boys, but he was maybe the baddest boy of them all. Okay. So he kind of like steps back from the band in 1969. And gets more deeply into drugs and becoming paranoid, etc., etc. And he drowns in a swimming pool. in the summer of 1969. One of the many tragedies of the year of 1969. This is, this was heavy news for the rock and roll world. Yeah, so sad, but they continued to keep going after that. The Stones, they replaced him and kept touring. And then in December of 1969, the Stones wanted to put on a free concert as a thank you. It was called the Thank You America concert. So as sort of like they kind of wanted to, like, I don't know, they wanted to make their own Woodstock in a sense, right? Which was also obviously a famous music festival, which was free. And so, yeah, thank you to America for their success. Basically, so that's why it's called Thank You America. Thank you for their massive success in America. But they did a really bad job putting it together. So it was put together very quickly. In December 1969, they wanted to do it in the Bay Area, and they couldn't find a venue until like very, very last minute, like a few days beforehand. The Altamont Speedway agreed to let them have their concert there. So yeah, it's at a racetrack. First of all, not a great venue for concerts. It's free, so hundreds, thousands of people are flocking there. They didn't have time to organize a big security detail. Also, it's a free concert, and they don't feel like spending a lot of their own money on a security detail. So they hire the Hells Angels, which is, you may have heard of. It's sort of like a bike gang. There's a lot of different elements to it. Some of them were white supremacists, some of them just like riding bikes, some of them, but they're just a bunch of tough guys that ride bikes. A lot of them just like to party though. Mainly it's just a bunch of people who love motorcycles and want to party. But there's definitely a violent, tough edge to the Hells Angels, right? They're not like super friendly people. I mean, if you're friends with them, they're cool. You can hang out with them, but they weren't like, yeah, definitely questionable choice to hire them as your security detail. All right. So anyways, also they didn't pay the Hells Angels in money. They paid them in beer. Okay. So the Hells Angels are like super drunk this whole time. They're not into drugs, but they like to drink a lot. Okay. There's, one of the things they're doing, they're hurling beer cans at audience members and stuff. The whole scene is chaotic. There's people in the Speedway. There's people outside the Speedway. There's no organization to it, right? Because they're just like, hey, come to the Speedway for our concert. Oh, and by the way, it's not just the Stones. There's opening acts like Jefferson Airplane, and I think who else is there? I can't remember. I think of it later. I'll let you know. But yeah, there's opening acts all day. Oh, what's his name? Jackson Brown, I think, was there. Okay. Anyway, so tragedy strikes, right? It's this mass. The Hells Angels are just like controlling people with like broken pool cues, hurling beer bottles at them. They have knives and stuff. There's tons of drug and alcohol use going on with them and the concert goers. And just like in a few songs into the Stones set, this guy named Meredith, who had been there, he's what's his name? Meredith something. He's angry. He wants to get closer to the stage, so he goes up on stage. He gets on top of a speaker. Some of the Hells Angels knock him over, push him, shove him off the speaker. Meredith is high on something. I don't know what. He's on drugs. He's coming back to the stage now, super duper angry, high on drugs, and pulls out a revolver. Right, he's a black man. He's been warned that there's a lot of racism still in this part of the Bay Area. So before he comes, he's told to arm himself for protection. Drugs and guns don't go well together. He pulls out a revolver, and the Hells Angels tackle him and stab him and kick him to death. So unfortunately, there's actually a murder at the concert. Altamont Speedway. I'll show you. It's not graphic, but I'll just show you what I'm talking about here.
if you people, we're splitting, man. If those cats don't stop beating everybody up inside, I want them out of the way. I'm afraid it's all right. It's all right.
Could you see what was happening, man?
No, you couldn't see anything. Where it's another scuffle. It was a...
There's the angel right there with the knife.
Meredith has the lime green suit on.
Where's the gun?
I'll roll it back and you'll see it against the girl's crocheted dress.
Right, it's there, isn't it?
That's the revolver that he pulled out. There's the Hell's Angel coming down on him with a knife.
So horrible.
So that concert was filmed. It was filmed. It was going to be part of a movie. Well, it was part of a movie, but then, yeah, didn't go as planned. Nothing went as planned. And then the Stones end up fleeing the concert via helicopter. So it was very tragic. It's sort of like a sad but fitting ending to the 60s, right? I talked about last time. It has this trajectory of so much hope at the beginning, and this kind of coming of age and turning into cynicism. Everything's sort of falling apart at the end of the decade with so many deaths. And like, this concert was supposed to be like, you know, we can do this. We don't need security because we're all cool. You know, everyone just be cool. Or just, you know, peace, love, and rock and roll. And it's just, everything turns sour. Like so many things in 1969, the end of the decade, just doesn't go how it was supposed to. Okay, so back to their music. Their Satanic Majesty's Request comes out in 1969, produced by Jimmy Miller, who kind of leads their most productive, critically acclaimed period. He kind of tightens up their sound, improves their music, improves the recording quality, etc. I'm going to skip Jump and Jack Flash, though. We're going to go on to Beggar's Banquet. Came out that same year. Two of their biggest hits, Sympathy for the Devil and Street Fighting Man. Listen to Sympathy for the Devil. It's an interesting track. There's no guitar for the first half of it or so. But yeah, I think the lyrics were based on a Russian novel that Mick Jagger had read, excuse me. It's got a samba beat.
Let
All right, I just want to get far enough to get here a little bit of that guitar solo. Very, very blues guitar solo. Okay, Street Fighting Man's on there too. Sorry, there we go. Okay, yeah. So yeah, just a couple of those tracks. Give Me Shelter. Let's do a little bit of that. It's not playing. Sorry. Here in this period, they're using a lot of extra percussion instruments. Here's a guiro, a lot of Latin percussion. You can't always get what you want. I'll just do a little bit of this. So all this studio production stuff is definitely influenced by and also a little bit mocking of the Beatles. All the choir and all this horn and stuff. I'll let you listen to the rest. You already heard the whole melody of the choir. Brown Sugar from the album Sticky Fingers. Okay, this album... yeah, I mean the album cover is right there, right? So this is an album cover by Andy Warhol, the artist. There's a real, I think it was functional zipper, and you know that's not a CD size, that's a full album vinyl, right? And there's obviously the jeans are like obviously very tight. So that's a sampling of their most creative period. Okay. Exile on Main Street. There's no like big standout hits for that album, but so I don't have anything to play for you. But check it out. It's probably their widely regarded now as their best album. It wasn't at the time. It's very, very bluesy. You can hear Sticky Fingers is going that direction too. Back to their kind of roots, American blues. I believe it was recorded in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, as well. It was a double album. It wasn't well received at the time, but it's since become one of their bests. The Stones are still touring on and off to this day. They've been around forever. They played the Super Bowl 30, I think. They're not still putting out like new records or anything, but they're still cashing in on those old hits. Okay, The Who. The Who are my personal favorite British invasion band. Just musically, I just enjoy their style the most. I mean, the Beatles. I appreciate the Beatles a ton, and they're more varied in their music. But the Who's style is just right up my musical taste. Okay, Roger Daltrey on vocals. This picture here. So Daltrey's on the right here. This is Pete Townsend on guitar. I believe this is John Entwistle on bass here, and then Keith Moon on drums. All four of them were actually very musically talented. There was no hangers on like Ringo Starr. So they were not as commercially successful as the Beatles or the Stones, but they were very, very influential on other bands, and they were still popular. Don't get me wrong, it's not like they weren't successful, they're just not as successful. And they really, really influenced metal and punk, right? They're kind of like the grandfathers of those bands in a lot of ways. And one of the main ways they did with their vibe, they were just like super aggressive, hyper masculine. They developed this thing. It was by accident at first. Pete Townsend accidentally broke his guitar at a concert and then just kind of went with it. And then Keith Moon started smashing his drum kit at the end of every show too. And so they would just, they were just highly destructive. And people really, it was very, very, people got really scandalized and like excited by that stage violence. They did a lot of amphetamines in their early years. They were very aggressive, confrontational. There was a lot of fighting within the band, a lot of friction. Townsend and Daltrey were always vying for leadership of the band. Townsend, windmill arms. You'll see that in the video. I can't really demonstrate it. But yeah, he had this. They're just their onstage style. Townsend would like swing his arms around while playing the guitar. It's called windmill arms. And then Roger Daltrey would like swing the mic around by the mic cord, kind of like a lasso or something. And I didn't write this down, but Keith Moon was also he was just a beast on the drums. He was a really good drummer, and he was just like super, super aggressive. He had a huge drum kit too, double bass drum, etc. Sometimes he would have like timpani and gong and stuff too. Really talented drummer. So the early hits, okay. My Generation was, and I Can't Explain were their first hits, 1965. My Generation is like pretty, it really struck a chord, right? He was like, I think Townsend was 20 when he wrote it. And it's about, it's about youth, and it's like, it's really targeted at, well, it's targeted at the youth, but it's really complaining about the older generation and how they're like, stodgy and holding them back. Let's take, it's got some famous stuttering lyrics by Roger Daltrey. At one point he stutters on the word fade. It starts with F, so he goes fade away. I wish, so that was scandalous because they, you would think you're going to hear a swear word. But it's clever. So it's clever. Oh, sorry. This is I Can't Explain first. So you definitely hear it's definitely there's still a little bit in like that Beatles mold, I think with the tight backing harmonies, and the vocals aren't super aggressive yet. But you hear the power chords are very distinct. Dant, dant, dant. You don't hear that in the Beatles or the Stones. That's sort of like that's one of the things predecessor to punk and metal. Here's My Generation. Vocals are getting more aggressive. Again, very strong guitar playing. So right there, that was like the very risque part with the fade away. All right, check out the rest on your own. Okay, their second album, a quick one, had their first like little opera. So you find, if you don't know already, you'll soon see the Who were famous for their operas, their rock operas. They invented that thing. It was not Bohemian Rhapsody. It was not the first one. Okay, so they still hadn't reached much success in the United States, but they decided to go on a tour anyways, and they had a really good, successful appearance at the 1967 Monterey Pop Music Festival in California. And so that kind of puts them on the map in the United States. How they got a booking on that festival without being popular ahead of time, I don't know. It was just a really big pop music festival. I think they probably didn't have like a primetime slot, basically. The Who Sell Out is their next album. It's a concept album. Remember I talked about pirate radio stations off the shores of the UK in the 50s and 60s. So it's a concept album that is like, and we hear this all the time now, especially in like hip hop records and stuff, where the album is like designed to sound like it's being broadcast on the radio. Like there's like a fake, there's like a pretend DJ saying things in between tracks, and there's like little radio jingles and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's the Who Sell Out, and that's this album cover down here, and it's a big joke, right? So it's like these are like their fake ads for baked beans. He's bathing in baked beans, which is disgusting. That's Roger Daltrey, the singer, and then Pete Townsend using a giant tube of deodorant for their fake commercials in the album. It includes I Can See for Miles, which became their first big US hit. Oh, this is Happy Jack from A Quick One. We're not going to listen to it though. This kind of becomes the blueprint for their future records. Big, powerful power chords, rumbling drums and bass, and Daltrey's vocals kind of floating on top of all that. You overdub 2 layers of guitar, which is interesting. The drum part here is very interesting. He's not playing a regular beat, he's just playing a snare drum march almost. So just the way that song is built is very unique for the time, right? Just it's kind of like pedal tones in the guitar, and it's just like thundering bass. They've kind of, like I said, it's kind of becomes a blueprint for the Who. They do a lot of like pedal tones, just kind of like a ringing chords that everything kind of like works against to build tension and resolution. It's really effective, and we're going to hear that more in their next album. So, as I mentioned, they were very aggressive. There's a lot of internal conflict. Daltrey was kicked out for a little bit until he promised to be less combative. In 1968, Townsend, he gets clean, more or less. He relapses in the 80s, but more or less gets clean when he meets the guru Meher Baba, right, pictured here in the top right of your screen. After this, he kind of comes up with this idea for a rock opera. I mean, they'd done this miniature 9-minute rock opera on a quick one, but this is like a much, much, much bigger concept. And this is supposed to be a story of spiritual enlightenment. So this is Tommy, the album and the rock opera Tommy. It becomes a movie. I'm not going to show you the movie. You should watch the movie, though. It's an interesting movie. It's considered a rock masterpiece. Very critically acclaimed at the time, and it still stands up today. It's great. Whether the plot and stuff is great or whatever, it doesn't matter. But the music is there's a lot of hits within the opera. Okay, so it's about this guy who loses his sensory skills, like he goes blind, right? And then becomes like a world famous pinball player. All right, so it's a little bit silly, and then I think he turns out to be a fraud at the end. So let's listen to some of the songs from that. Here is Pinball Wizard. Classical and acoustic guitar. These kind of drones again. Droning guitar chords. Really active bass line against the drums and the guitar. All right, check out the rest of that album. Great album, Tommy, 1969. Okay, I'm going to show you a quick video here. This is just to kind of give you a sense of their stage presence, their style, which was pretty unique. This is a song called Magic Bus, which I don't think I played yet. You're gonna see the windmill arms and stuff like that.
Magic Bus.
Every day I get in the queue. I get on a bus that takes me to you. I don't care how much I pay. I wanna buy that bus for my baby someday. Too much magic bus, a magic bus, a magic bus. just to sign my baby. 2 birds, a magic birds. Folks have 6 months each day. 2 birds, a magic birds. I try my baby every way. 2 birds, a magic birds. Magic birds, give me 100. Magic birds, I won't take under. Birds like thunder, what's each wonder?
Okay, I'm gonna skip ahead to Windmill Arms. That was it, Windmill Arms. Okay, that's enough to give you a sense. But they were just a great live act. Okay, who's next? Is there next? And my favorite album of theirs, Who's Next, incorporated synthesizers for the. They're not the first rock band to use synthesizers, but they're the first one to like use it to integrate it as like a structural part of the song. The Beatles used synths a little bit, but it was more like kind of like to add filigree or add a little bit extra something, but wasn't like critical to the structure of the song. But the Who here really used it in a totally different way. So we're gonna listen to Baba O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again. So Baba O'Reilly is a combination of the name for Mayor Baba and then the classical minimalist composer Terry Riley. Not the O'Reilly is just the O is just silly. It's Terry Riley and Baba Mayer. And you can hear, I mean, Townsend is like very much into this Eastern spiritual thing. And then the whole minimalist movement in classical music is very much tied into Eastern thinking too. You know, Terry Riley, I guess I don't know too much about, but yeah, he was in Eastern philosophy. And then people like Philip Glass were very much into like yoga, and a lot of them are like Buddhists and stuff. So here is Bob O'Reilly. You can hear it. So this like repetitive synthesizer sequence, and that the whole song is based on. Oops. Excuse me, I said it backwards. This one's Won't Get Fooled Again, and the next will be Bob O'Reilly. This is Won't Get Fooled Again. Here comes one of the best screams in rock and roll history. Roger Daltrey's got a great scream. Okay, here's Bob O'Reilly. The same principles apply. It's a droney synth, repeated synth part that the song is built around. All right, we still got this formula here. Droney power chords in the guitar. Highly active drums. What was on top? This part here is actually Pete Townsend is going to sing here, not Roger Daltrey. You can hear the vocals are quite different. I'll let you listen to the rest on your own. Maybe the greatest song ever written for driving around at night in your car with windows down. Won't give Bob O'Reilly. It's a great song. Towards the end, it breaks down into sort of like this extended electric violin solo that actually Pete Townsend plays. He puts down his guitar and picks up the violin and plays it. Pretty interesting. Okay, 1973. Oh, that was 1972, by the way. I forgot the date. Quadrophenia comes out in 73. It's another rock opera, also critically acclaimed. It's about a mod who were like the preppy boys of the mid 60s in England, who has a 4-way split personality, quadrophenia, representing each member of the band. So it's a double album. Also turned into a movie just like Tommy. I don't think I have any hits from it for you, but check it out. It's great. Who Are You? 1978, several years later, right? So their production is slowing down. Who Are You? It's sort of reflective on now they've been around for a while now, and there's this growing metal and punk movement, and they kind of feel they're like the elder statesmen now of music. They're not like on the cutting edge anymore. They were the bad boys, but now they're like, in their 40s or something, and they don't know. They feel different about, people ask them, who are you? Right? They used to be, everybody used to know who they are. And it's not like people have forgotten the Who, but they're not like, the front page news anymore. So we're going to listen to the title track, Who Are You? Still a lot of synths going on here. Of course, there's a drone and the synth and the bass. All right. So, yeah, it's a great song. You've probably heard that before. Keith Moon, the drummer, dies of an overdose in 1978. He struggled with alcoholism, and he died of either a sedative or a combination of a sedative and an alcohol. The sedative was supposed to help him with the alcohol. Whether he was still drinking while using it or not is not entirely clear. But yeah, overdosed, alcoholism. It's not, some combination thereof. Townsend tried to downplay, but they never really returned to their full strength after that. They replaced and they tried to carry on right away, but it just wasn't the same. Keith Moon was an incredible drummer. You wouldn't have had John Bonham of Led Zeppelin, etc., and all the amazing rock drummers to come after him without Keith Moon. Keith Moon really is the first great rock drummer. I think I can say that pretty safely. I can't think of any. It wasn't Ringo Starr. It wasn't that great. I mean, he had his fills were just next level. Just was more creative, more intense. Anyways, so the band, I mean, they still kind of like the Stones, not to the same extent as the Stones, but they still tour now and again. I believe they're actually in Maryland just early. It was I think it was the end of last year, 2019. They were actually in Baltimore and played a show at the Hippodrome, I think. Anyways, that's the Who. The Who. John Entwistle died about 20 years ago. So the only remaining touring members are Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend. Okay, there's a lot of other British invasion bands, but they all kind of pale in comparison to those three. But I should mention them. The Kinks, you've probably heard a number of their songs. You Really Got Me. Let's take a listen to that one. And Lola. Still very bluesy. Okay, Lola. One of the greatest sing-along pop tunes. Here we go. Everyone loves to sing along to the song.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola. C-O-L-A Cola. She walked up to me and she asked me to dance. I asked her her name and in a dark brown voice she said Lola. L-O-L-A Lola. La 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 Lola.
All right, great song, Lola. The Yardbirds, they don't have any like big hits for me to play for you, but you should check them out. Yardbirds, most well known for being the training ground for three of the greatest rock and roll / blues guitarists ever. Eric Clapton was their lead guitarist, and then Jeff Beck, who's also an amazing solo guitarist, and then of course Jimmy Page, who went on to form Led Zeppelin out of the remnants of the Yardbirds. They all took turns as lead guitarists, and somehow the Yardbirds never took off very much. They were never that, they had gigs and stuff. They were touring. They toured a little bit in England, but they never had major commercial success, despite having all those guitar players. There was a lot of they were constantly debating about what direction to take the band, and they just never chose one and went with it. It was just a mess. Anyways, but they managed to attract those players. Last but not least, maybe least, the Animals, House of Rising Sun. You've probably heard this song as well. This is actually an old traditional, I think, English ballad or something. And Bob Dylan sang it on his first eponymous album. And then the Animals took it again and made it more rock and roll. So in addition to bringing it all back home, this is one of the things that kind of opened the door to folk rock, because now it's a rock band taking a folk song, right? So we talked a couple lectures ago about Bob Dylan taking folk and going electric with it. Well, this is an electric rock band going folk
There is a house in New Orleans they call the rising sun, and it's been the ruin of many a poor boy. And God, I know I'm one.
And that's about it. It's a folk song, so there's not much of a chorus, but he just sings up up an octave when it gets more intense. Anyways, yeah, great song. If you haven't heard it before, check it out. That is it for today. That was the end of the British Invasion section. I skipped the Mercy Beat bands because I don't have a strong opinion about them, but they're worth checking out. The other bands from Liverpool, and of course, we didn't get to everything, but as always, do my best. Try to hit the most critical bands. I hope you enjoyed the British Invasion.